Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Fabrication Friday podcast. I'm your host, Joe Fairley, certified prosthetist, 3D printing enthusiast, and owner of Ascent Fabrication. Fabrication Friday is an all-around fun time where I talk about 3D printing applications, conduct interviews with industry leaders, and much more. Come join us every Friday for an informational discussion around the evolution of the additive manufacturing field and how we utilize various digital workflows and 3D printing methods in our daily work at Ascent Fabrication. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fabrication Friday podcast. I'm your host, Joe Fairley, owner of Ascent Fabrication. It's been a couple weeks since we've been into the Fabrication Friday podcast, but for very good reason. We've had a lot of community involvement over the past couple weeks, getting out to the Saratoga County Chamber of Commerce Business to Business Expo event here in Saratoga Springs, New York. Collaborating and meeting a lot of newer local businesses that we could do some work with, as well as the New York State Innovation Summit put on by FuseHub. That was an awesome event last week, getting to hear from a lot of local big companies that are doing some wonderful work in a lot of different fields. It was nice to be able to, again, get out into our local community and meet a broader community here in New York State for what is going on in an innovative sense. Not necessarily has to be into 3D printing, but there were quite a few 3D printing companies there at the event. So that was kind of nice to get to mingle around with a few different 3D printing companies. A couple new ones that I met. Lithos is from Austria. They do a lot of ceramic 3D printing, actually, and they have their US base here in, I believe it's Troy, New York. So they're basically our next door neighbors. Definitely want to check out what they've got going on with ceramic 3D printing, because that could be pretty interesting. Have some cool medical applications for potentially some implants. I think there might even be implants already out there 3D printed by ceramics. So some cool people there at Lithos. There were a couple other companies, not strictly solely focused on building 3D printers or only focused on 3D printing, but having 3D printing as part of their business. One of the other companies that we talked with was Innosek. Innosek and John Kappel, the owner over there. Him and I really resonated pretty closely right off the bat. Just being a few hours west of us here in upstate New York. He's out in Buffalo and doing the same type of design for additive manufacturing techniques, working with a lot of engineering grade materials. So I've asked him to come on the podcast today, and pretty excited to have him on. So hope you guys enjoy this episode of the podcast, and stay tuned. Thanks everyone for listening into the Fabrication Friday podcast again. Today I've got a pretty special guest with me, Mr. John Kappel of Innosek. Pretty excited to have him on. He is semi-local to me here in, I would say, still upstate New York, but way out west in Buffalo. Is that right, John?
Yeah, 716.
Yeah. So thanks for coming on. We had met at the New York State Innovation Summit put on by FuseHub. What was that? Just over a week ago.
Like a week ago.
Yeah, it seems like it's almost been a month since that amount of time has gone by, honestly, but
still catching up.
Yeah, trying to keep busy. And so thanks for coming on. Great to meet you there at the Innovation Summit. Sounds like we have kind of a lot in common with what we're doing. So
yeah,
would you mind introducing yourself and what Innosek is?
Yeah, Joe, absolutely. So yeah, awesome. Ditto. Thanks for having me on. And I was following your journey, months, even a year before we actually met in person. So the work that you guys are doing over there is awesome. I really appreciate it. And I think that the work that you guys are doing is adding to, benefiting all of us 3D printers around. So thanks for having me on to kind of share a little bit more. So my name is John Kappel. I'm a Buffalo-based entrepreneur and owner of Innosek, or an additive manufacturing service provider. So contract manufacturing, geared mostly towards B2B companies, helping them really hand holding through the entire additive process, from designing specifically for additive manufacturing to working with them to identify what their part and material needs are, pairing it with the right technology and material, and then producing parts up to wherever it really breaks even with injection molding is kind of our volume.
Nice, man. Well, yeah, thanks again for that, gracious kudos there at the beginning. And so with everything you got going on there at Innosek, B2B, what does that look like for you in your day-to-day? Are you dealing with like large scale companies, smaller local companies? What does that look like for you guys over the years?
Yeah, shoot, I can tell you the beginning of our business was geared ultimately towards the product developers and the inventors, the individuals with the big ideas that are looking for a way to get into the market easily and kind of get some tweaks along the way. But what we learned relatively quickly is that if we wanted to scale a company and a business, we needed to target big players. And that's ultimately where we started to make the shift into B2B sales of parts. So right now, primarily 70% of our business is with large scale manufacturing or engineering firms, other contract manufacturers, and 30% is going to be product developers, consumers, people that are looking to invent new products.
Mhm.
And we do a lot more, I guess, hand holding and prototyping, processing for them, for the consumer based products, to really just get them to validate their products a lot faster using 3D printing.
Nice, man. So how did you initially get started with Innosek? Were you printing before Innosek? Was there a precursor in school or something, or how'd that come
Yeah,
about?
I wish. I wish. Growing up in the middle of New York State, my school didn't even have a football team, so we definitely didn't have a 3D printing lab. But I wish we did. I wasn't even exposed to it until I graduated college. I was actually like a year and a half removed from college at that point. When I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, I started my first startup, which was a software company. That just allowed you to find events around you. So I've always kind of been entrepreneurial. I had a house painting business in college before that. And as I was over in Massachusetts, I really just missed Buffalo. And I had a couple friends that were a college roommate of mine and a buddy that were starting at the time, it was a storefront. And it was basically a 3D printed storefront where company or people would come in, get parts made, get, services done on their 3D printers. They get design work, they'd get 3D prints done. And I think that business was like 10 years ahead of its time. I think like in 10 years, maybe 20 years, where people start to have 3D printers in their homes pretty readily, to get that to the masses, that type of storefront's going to be really, really popular. But at that point in time, it was failing pretty bad because, how much money you need to make to keep the lights on of an actual storefront business
Right.
far outweighs the amount of money people are willing to pay to get their doorknob replaced by a 3D printer, for example. So I was moving back to Buffalo at the same time that company was kind of, finding an inflection point, we'll say. And I was asked to join on as the business side and take operations. So once I joined in 2018, January 1, 2019, we closed that business and pivoted directly into Innosek. Um, and yeah, match made in heaven. B2B has been the sweet spot for us. There's just so many great, there's great mechanical and industrial applications that 3D printing is such a perfect application as long as you can find the right technology and material to, fit your needs. Uh, it kind of fit into the process of manufacturing perfectly already. Um, so we just grown from there.
Right. Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. I mean, with where FDM printing has come in the last even 5 to 8 years, I've been printing since 2015, and there's definitely been an increase in quality on the low end printers, as I'm sure you know. I've seen a couple of your printers, one that you brought there to the summit, and done some modifications on. But these low end consumer printers are becoming pretty powerful tools that not just rapid prototyping, but getting into production level status, right? I mean, uh,
Hmm.
how many printers did you say that you had again?
Yeah, so our breakdown, so we have 45 FDM printers, four resin printers, two Formlabs, two just like any cubics. And then we have one SLS machine. So 50 in total. Um, our output's like, if we really like 1,000 parts a day off of just FDM, depending on size.
Right.
But you're right, 100%. It's like why we picked the desktop FDM, machine was that we were looking at the market and looking at these companies like Shapeways, and Shapeways competitors. And if you look at their balance sheets, and their P&L statements, which you can find online, they're losing $35 million a year.
Yeah.
$35 million a year they're losing.
Yeah.
And when you piece the when I me knowing the industry, just kind of putting the pieces together, they're buying these $150,000 machines to do the same thing that we're getting the same quality and accuracy off of our $1,000 machines that we're buying off off the retail website and just modifying the hell out of.
Right. Right.
We spend a lot of time on the slicer settings and stuff, but it
Yeah.
just, you're right, it's the machines are great, and if you know what you're doing, you put some time into experimenting with them, you can really make some awesome end use production parts.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I heard you say at the Innovation Summit, the design for additive manufacturing approach, right? So you're
Mhm.
thinking about how you're going to be printing those parts. You might have to modify the design slightly of some of these parts that we're getting from consumers or B2B, making it more printable from FDM standards. And yeah, the materials are getting a little bit better as long as your slicer settings are on point, which I know that you and I have spent thousands of countless hours that we don't even want to admit.
So many hours.
Just staring at prints, going around, and trying to fine tune those print settings in order to come up with, really engineering grade parts coming out of these FDM
Mhm.
consumer level printers. Um, so tell me a little bit about the printer that you use, if you'd like to share about how you modified it, what kind of materials you use as well.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Shoot, when we were growing the business right out of the basement, the first thing we did was we bought pretty much every single hobbyist desktop 3D printer that was on the market at that point in time. And we would study. We knew that there was a couple key factors that we wanted to go through when we were looking. It's what has the sturdiest frame, what's the most easily upgradable, and what's open source. So with those three things, we were able to know that we could take the bones of what the printer already had and pretty much just build it ourselves,
Mhm.
with all the replacement parts. So I mean, key things that we've done is just like upgrade the bed, upgrade the hot end, turn it to direct drive, reinforce the frame, um, things like that. We've modified and created our own firmware, so we've developed some things within the firmware itself, which are pretty useful for calibrations and such.
Nice.
And then a lot of it is on the slicer settings. So once you kind of have the printer 100%, then it's the slicer settings. And the one thing that we were doing when we were making our printers was we needed to make sure that this printer was a universal printer, so it could print everything from TPUs to carbon fiber reinforced nylon 12. We wanted everything in between to really just have it be one solid piece.
Mhm.
So that's like incremental steps. Every time you introduce a brand new material to your machine, you got to replay with those settings, and you learn a whole bunch of new stuff. That's where we learned, like, year one, that if we wanted to print TPU, we needed to go to direct drive. Just simple like that.
That's
But
right.
that's what you learn every time there's a new material. You learn about maybe special pieces of hardware that are going to help you make that possible, or settings that are going to make that possible. And it's a blend of all three. It's the firmware, the hardware, and the software.
Sure, sure. So I guess getting into some of the nitty gritty, the firmware there, is it that based on Marlin, RepRap, Clipper? What are you guys into?
Marlin. Marlin was the OG. We've since been fooling around a lot with yeah, I can't even think of it. The I can't even think of what the slicer the firmware we've been playing with now. It's been
The one that's like
a couple
smoothie
months
or
since we've had
something?
to. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what the logo is on our printer.
Yeah.
But yeah, it all started with Marlin, and then as everybody and their mother started joining the 3D printing industry, there's just more opportunities to keep your eyes open to what's better out there.
Hmm.
So forums have been great, and just really doing the research and playing around. We love firmware was the biggest challenge to really understand, because as mechanical guys, right?
Hmm.
Um, the firmware is a totally different thing.
Hmm.
So that was the biggest obstacle, to really understand how to modify firmware to make it do what we wanted it to.
Hmm.
And we needed to find a firmware that was built off of a system that allows you to do that. So it started with Marlin, and then as other people started developing their own, we would pick up theirs and modify those as well.
Gotcha. Nice. So did you go ahead and specifically look for, and hire someone who was specifically good in coding, or did you, learn some of that process along the way as well?
Yeah, both. So the first couple handful of people that we have ever hired were good in all aspects, or had some experience in all aspects. They were 3D printing hobbyists originally, or tinkerers, and they had this research mindset. So they, if we had a challenge or we knew there was an opportunity, they were the type of guys that would go in and do the digging and really figure out how to make it possible, and then grow upon that and teach the team. So when you're a startup, everybody wears a lot of hats, plays a different roles. Cross training is super important. Just like education sharing and knowledge sharing is super important. So we were really keen on that everybody would have their hand in the industry news and knowledge,
Hmm.
and we'd have a roundtable discussion to really share those pretty openly. So
Hmm.
um, everybody kind of played a role in their own knowledge, plus the learning of more firmware stuff that they could apply to the company.
Right. Yeah. Having more minds, understanding more parts of the business, I think is super effective, right? Being able to collaborate like that as a team and speaking from the same cloth if you're talking about the printer settings, the firmware coding, the materials that you're using, or on the CAD side of things too. Being able to talk about all of those intelligently at once is
Hmm.
definitely a skill in itself. I think that just with more time of printing and raising this educational bar around what can be and should be 3D printed by FDM, I think is super valuable. So
Hmm.
definitely kudos to you to having that forward thinking of bringing that up in your team. um, Talk a little bit about, how, like what kind of projects, I guess, you guys have worked on in the past that have
Ooh,
you've seen that have been super effective for 3D printing specifically, either
yeah.
in like, again, maybe bringing a product to market, or in maybe like a large numbers production status.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I'll share three projects that come to mind that are pretty cool. The first one is uh, in Buffalo, where we're located. We have the Buffalo Museum of Science, and we've been working on this project for uh maybe like 6 months now or so. And they have this one display, an interactive display where children will come and, like, well, I guess anybody can, but it's designed for kids. They'll pump up pressure and press a button, and a rocket will shoot all the way to the ceiling and hit a bell, right?
Cool.
uh, but originally, when they had this display made, the company that did it pretty much just used like foam noodles, like pool noodles, to create the rocket.
Okay.
And it worked well, but they wanted to really elevate that after having that for 10 years. So they contracted us to redesign that rocket and 3D print it and see how that works. Which came with its own challenges, because there's a lot of weight. Uh, when you're launching stuff into the air and landing it, there's a lot of forces. There's a lot of forces going up. There's a lot of forces coming down, and that's all stuff that we had to work out during prototyping, really. And what that came down to is the material.
Hmm.
So we redesigned this rocket actually to look like a Bell Aerospace rocket, which Bell Aerospace was an aerospace manufacturer here in Buffalo back in the day.
Okay.
So we made a rocket that was modeled after one of their actual rockets. 3D printed it in TPU, super light infill, kind of controlling everything that the quick things that you can control.
Right.
Um, so we 3D printed that and found that, yeah, if we did a TPU, when it lands, it's going to compress, and that's going to be good because you want that kind of compression when you're landing,
Hmm.
and when it makes it more lightweight when you're shooting it. But what we were learning is that the forces were too strong, and when it was landing, it was smushing everything together and destroying the layer lines and pretty much blowing up the whole entire rocket.
Okay.
And let alone this thing needs to get shot off like thousands of times, right?
Sure.
Before they replace it, which ultimately they knew. So we turned to VarioShore, which is a sick
Yeah.
material. I know you use it.
Yeah.
But it adjusts that, what is it, baking soda inside of it or something that just allows for the different foaming agents depending on the different temperatures that you print it at. So we were like, shoot, we can like make something that's really cushiony and kind of similar to a pool noodle.
Right.
Um, and we used that, and we had the same thing happen. It was a little bit better. It lasted a little bit longer, but not something we were happy with. And just recently, the conclusion of this whole thing, how it ended was we 3D printed the skin in VarioShore and
Okay.
then filled it with spray foam.
Oh, okay.
So
Sure.
so we reinforced it with like insulating foam that's super light, just some open cell foam.
Yeah.
And that's being tested right now, and so far so good. So something that's key is like 3D printing alone isn't going to do it. Use that as the create your structure and then get a little bit of innovation in you.
Sure.
So by kind of combining some of these things, we're able to create a really sick solution. Um, the next one I would say was a cool product that uh, there's a problem inside of restaurants, right? And I don't know if it's a problem, but there's certain drinks that need to be shaken
Hmm.
that don't really need to be shaken, like Moscow mules and margaritas, and like, it's not like a super handcrafted, complicated beverage. There
Sure.
should be an easier way to dispense that to somebody, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this company makes margarita mix in a keg for like to be put on draft
Okay.
or to put on a tap, right?
Hmm.
Um, but the issue is that you can't ship alcohol across the country.
Yeah.
So they need to have a way to get the alcohol inside of the keg of mix that they're selling.
Right.
And they contracted us to hire and prototype and manufacture the first 1,000 of these funnels. So we developed this funnel that locks into the keg, allows the air out, and allows people to pour their alcohol in. So we worked on that and did the first 1,000 prototypes before they went to injection mold, and probably went through like 8 design iterations of that
Okay.
product before it went to market. And now, like, you'll find them all throughout California at Padre Stadium and all these games. You can find margarita mix and Moscow mules on
Yeah.
draft. They signed
Yep.
a deal with Delaware North here in Buffalo.
Yep.
Um, and that was just a super rewarding project, and we were able to do thousands of units for them, really validate a lot faster that this is a product that can be possible, and then their business
Sure.
can move forward.
Sure.
And then injection molded,
Gotcha.
and that was just like a PETG, needed to be kind of durable, needed to not break as easily in case people dropped it, um, stuff like that. And the last one I'd share is a cool project now because this customer actually just struck a deal with QVC, and just got his first PO for 10,000 units of
Cool.
a phone case that amplifies the audio. So we've developed that and manufactured, you know, close to 100 different prototypes of this thing. Um, and the last final prototype took it to QVC, and after that journey ended, got a deal for his first, just one series of iPhone too. So think about after that all
Yeah.
the additional phones that come after. But that was really prototyping. That was really interesting because we knew that phone cases are a special type of polycarbonate that are soft and flexible. And there's no real material that mimics that type of silicone polycarbonate mix phone case.
Hmm.
So it was there was a struggle of really trying to get the proper properties of the phone needing it. So being able to 3D print different parts and different materials allowed us to find something that was comparable to what the material is of phone cases. Because with audio, the harder the walls are, the audio bounces off of those and it amplifies. But if it's softer,
Yeah.
it actually absorbs it a little bit,
Right.
the sound waves, and it makes it dull.
Right.
So when we were prototyping with TPU, we were having that issue where the decibels were really low because of the material. But if we did it in PLA, it would be really high. But there's trade-off because how do you get the phone in if it's going to break?
Sure.
There needs to be some flexibility. So all
Yeah.
those things are things we worked at, to determine the validation, I guess, of the product.
That's pretty neat, man. I mean,
Yeah,
all
that's
three
super fun.
projects, I'd have questions on all three projects for sure. But I guess what you've mentioned a couple times in those projects is like, people coming to you with ideas about products that they want to come out with, and then they go to injection molding, or again, because of, I mean, do you see a huge monetary, difference, whereas would they still have any other benefit of continuing to get some of those parts printed by you?
100%. You know, there's certain parts that um they just need to be 3D printed for the way we're designing them. So for example, this phone case, right? We created a 3D printable model that, he could have 3D printed the first I think the break even point was like 1800 units, say, before it made sense to just buy the mold. So that's an opportunity where, yeah, if you wanted to sell the 3D printed version, we made a model that was 3D printed all in one, and that's because the internal structure had some geometry that could only be 3D printed.
Mm-hmm.
When ultimately he had a 10,000 order PO and decided, they can't 3D print that economically and need to do injection molding, that model needed to be split into a 2 or 3 part mold.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of the trade-off. If they 3D printed it, the mold cost would have been a little cheaper because they didn't need to break the model into 3 different pieces.
Right.
Um, but that's how it goes. That's where 3D printing kind of validates it. We created the one version model that worked. Then they were able to kind of reverse engineer and dissect it to make it an injection moldable.
Okay.
But I've seen parts that have been breaking even with us up to 5,000 units. And again, it all depends on geometry and
Yeah.
size of part and stuff. But yeah, I've had customers that have ordered, you know, 4,000, 5,000 units, just small little things, because it makes way more sense economically
Mm-hmm.
to do so that way. And if
Yeah.
the materials are good and the quality, the results, all you really care about, right? There are some people that get hung up in the process, but like if you're getting a part that's accurate, looks good, and works, what does it matter what's the process it's made of?
Right.
If it's the same thing, right?
Right.
Um, so that's something that we're trying to push more of, is that normalcy of production of 3D printed parts.
Right. 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 Yeah. I mean, to me, it's with you and I being so hyper focused on 3D printing
Mm,
specifically. My question almost always is, well, why would you immediately go toward thinking injection molding after we've prototyped it specifically for 3D printing? Like if we're going about a design process that includes design techniques that can only be 3D printed, or if there's room to customize that product down the road, you know, anytime you include any kind of customization, going for a mold is automatically going to be a little bit more cost prohibitive. So,
yeah.
I don't know that in, again, today's day and age, with people's aversion for 3D printing in large masses, I don't know that it's that much of a problem anymore.
I
With
agree.
having the type of printers that you have, that you're able to scale up in pretty large numbers and have, print farms. I don't see that as much different than having that, huge warehouse of specialized equipment for injection molding. But I do see a bigger, problem with the injection molding side of things, is that there's a much bigger capital expense for a company to try to get up and running like that, right? So
Hmm.
I think that, and especially for labor shortages and wages, right? If we're having, those types of pieces put into the equation for, business owners like us, 3D printing makes way more sense if we're trying to start a business in this type of manufacturing space right now, rather than going any kind of injection molding. What's your take on that in terms of, like, again, when you
Hmm.
approach a customer about trying to convince them that they should be doing 5,000, 10,000 units with you, what's your thought process when you're talking with them?
Yeah, everything we do is for the customer's benefit. And whether they know that or right, not. It's always the perception with them, is what I've seen, is that, injection molding is what they know. It's tried and true. So it's always been there. So that's like where they kind of jump to first. Their mind, it's like, oh, I need to, the end goal is to get this thing mass manufactured with injection molding. and it doesn't matter. If the part is functional and the material is right, and the price is good, um, we will push people to 3D print that as much as possible. So when we're doing our sales with customers, it's really important to capture a couple different key pieces of information about them. We'd love to kind of get their thought about how they plan on finishing manufacturing, or what's in their mind about the manufacturing process that they believe will be best and why. And then when you kind of understand why, you can drill into what the real concern is, and really it ends up being like, oh, this is all I know, or price, or quality.
Hmm.
And all those things are achievable with 3D printing at some type of volume. So it's really for us understanding the goal of the customer. If this is, if they plan to sell, a couple thousand a year, um, and then it makes sense more so to 3D print that, we're going to push them to 3D printing. There is a point, a type of product or a design or a volume that always makes sense to manufacture high, and do something injection molding if cost is your, biggest concern, or, you're not open to doing a really unique geometry. You don't have a unique geometry product.
Right.
Um, there's always that trade-off, but yeah, like why spend so much money up front, uh, before you even know if people are gonna really like be super interested in it or know what the market is gonna look like.
Hmm.
So using 3D printing for us is like, yeah, we most of what we do is production parts. So like 70 something percent last year was actually end use production parts that are being used in final goods and machines. So if we can prove that and put some confidence within the customer and the consumer, that these aren't, 3D prints from 5 years ago. This is advanced so quickly, and they're so strong and durable, and will do good work. If we can prove that, and gain that credibility for the AM industry,
Hmm.
we'll start to see that. And
Yeah.
shops like ours are going to be positioned, I think, so much better in the long term by and because I think it makes sense perceptionally,
Hmm.
um, to start with low volume and then grow up. Like, injection molding companies that implement 3D printers start at high volume and then try to capture low volume. And I think there's such a little learning curve to 3D printing that that's going to be a huge challenge for them.
Right.
But 3D printing companies like ours can, when it comes time and we keep seeing this growth within our customers, when we really want to retain them instead of handing them off to our injection molding partners,
Yeah.
we could buy an injection mold machine. And there's so many injection molding people around, right, looking for jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
That skill set isn't something that we need to learn ourselves. We can just hire somebody to do it for a good wage. And I think that's a business model that's geared for survival and like this huge impact in product development and manufacturing going forward. It's like starting with this, being able to capture all the volumes. Like, there shouldn't be a cap around volume. It's like, okay,
Right.
yeah, we can do it all, like 1 to a million,
Right.
or whatever.
Right.
So that's kind of where I see how this merger is going to happen, and kind of the play between injection mold and 3D printing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I had never really even considered the injection molding industry before I got into 3D printing. Didn't know anything about it. Still, relatively, I wouldn't say that I'm well versed in the injection molding industry in general. I know enough to understand why some people might want to go to injection molding, but one thing that I hear from some of our customers that are again used to seeing injection molded parts, simply because there are absolutely more of those out there in the world right now. Um, People say, "Oh well, the layer lines, it doesn't look finished." Um, you know, Again, I'll just leave it at that. What's your take on that when people come to you with that comment?
Perception, right? It's just like there will be a point in time where the 3D printed layer lines are normalized, right? And
Yeah.
I'm sure when injection molding first came out, everybody, complained about the line, right? The injection line that's around plastic parts. Like I'm sure there's always something that people are gonna pick at.
Right.
I could say, what we can do immediately to kind of combat that is, I don't know, decrease your layer height a little bit.
Yeah.
There's things we can do in the printer settings to really create a nice smooth finish. Some of the and black, especially black, dark gray. There's colors that hide layer lines really, really well.
Sure.
So instead of doing post processing work, which is always an option, we try to gear towards the preventative side of things.
Yeah.
So how in tune can we get our settings to limit the visibility of layer lines?
Mhm.
So and white parts, you're always going to see the layer lines because that's just how the color white works. And if
Mhm.
you do a really dark color like a black or a gray, which by default we always do dark gray or black as our default color,
Sure.
or if they have no preference, it's always black or gray, and that's because it's going to add to that perceived look. It's going to look a little bit better for them. Yeah, the parts are going to function exactly the same,
Sure.
but the black parts with the really small layer height is going to look way better and have fewer noticeable layer lines. So that's how we combat that. But really, it's like expectation setting. Just showing people samples, getting them to understand that this is where it's at. And yeah, there's tons of benefits. And actually, the quality, what you'll learn, consumer, is as you sell your product, what you think and what your customer thinks are two totally different things, right?
Oh yeah.
Your customer doesn't even, your customer wants it to work. Your customer buys something because it solves a problem, not because it was injection molded.
Right.
So I think it's twofold. It's mostly just kind of perception and people being used to what they're used to.
Yeah.
Um, and in a couple of years, that'll all go away as more and more products will be made with additive manufacturing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think definitely think we're going to start to see a lot more consumer products out there in the world, in people's homes, around, out in stores. I see people posting on LinkedIn about, oh, I see a mannequin that's 3D printed. The people that are in the industry like we are, we pick these things out wherever we go if we do see something like that. But I don't know. There's this little bit of wow factor, I think, for me, and what I try to convey to some people who don't understand 3D printing yet is that uh, there might be that wow factor into their consumer part to say like, oh, this is a marketing aspect of, oh, this is 3D printed. So for like 3D printed shoes, having that little bit of wow factor, I think
Yeah.
adds something different for a few different consumer level products.
Hmm.
That people want to say, oh, I've got something that's 3D printed. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, oh yeah, I've got this awesome thing that's injection molded, like
Never.
it doesn't have any kind of wow factor around it. They can't, I mean, there's again, things that we can 3D prints that can't be injection molded because of those design features. So
Hmm.
I'm right with you. I think we're going to see a lot more consumer products out there that people are going to get
Yeah.
desensitized to the layer lines. And I mean, honestly, with the layer lines, it's like it's a short term problem that won't even really be a problem for some of these
Hmm.
people that like, oh, I need it to be smooth. Well, what are those conceptions about why you need it to be smooth? Or is there anything functional about it needing to be smooth that I can
Hmm.
understand? However, the person sitting out on the beach using your product isn't going to be, caring about whether something's 3D printed or not. They're at the beach and they're having fun. Like, not
Yeah.
not exactly something that is necessarily a problem in the real world when we're talking about consumer products. Um,
Hmm.
and
Yeah. I think there's different grades too, right? Like the shoes blow my mind. That is 100% right. Like additive manufacturing shoes. That's cool, right? That's a sexy thing.
yeah,
I remember when it first came out, I was like, dang, where do I get a pair? How do I buy a pair for my whole team?
yeah, yeah,
Uh, you know. So yeah, I
yeah.
agree, 100%.
Oh, it's interesting though, when we talk about start getting into more consumer level products and these printers being so very accessible to people now, right? That we can buy $300 or less very functional printers, right? So, I kind of segueing into what you and I talked about just before the podcast started here. Something that I've just come into uh
Oh, wow.
understanding the nuances of this, but So 3D printing firearms, we'll just get into it, right? No matter what your standpoint is on
Always the
3D
topic of
printing
conversation somehow.
firearms, yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's something that I'm like, I get fired up about because I completely understand, having the right to bear arms and having that creativity and making something for yourself, right? Um, but yeah, I wanted to bring this up on the podcast too, because I think it's super relevant to, what we're doing in the 3D printing industry, specifically here in New York State, right? So just a little bit of background, there are people who are out there printing, the lower section of some firearms. Not exactly some of those metal components that actually make up the firearm, right? Um, and with this kind of consumer easy playing field for buying a 3D printer from a company like yours or mine, that's very easy for someone to do, right? And they could be using that printer for a number of different reasons, right? Maybe not
Mhm.
just trying to print the lowers of firearms, and the reason they're doing that is so that they
Anything.
have yeah, right, they're going to print anything, and these people who have any kind of design experience are tinkerers as well. They're printing other things, but they're trying to do it from my viewpoint of wanting to customize some aspects of the firearm.
Mhm.
The people that really put time into figuring out how to print lowers, those people I think are more of the firearm enthusiasts wanting to customize something that they're actually going to be using later, right?
Mhm.
Not dissimilar to any of some of the consumer products that you and I are printing, trying to customize something for someone who's going to be putting out a product of their own. Um, but this is, pretty readily available to people. And unfortunately, there have been some negative events around it where people are going to gun buyback programs and they're printing, part of these guns and assembling them, getting the upper portions online because these assemblies are readily available. And I don't know specifically, I'd have to research this a little bit more, but if there's a need for a background check for the uppers of a handgun, let's say, um,
Yeah.
that I don't know. Probably different state to state, obviously, but what's concerning and why I'm bringing this up, and I know that you've got some thoughts on this as well, is because they're in New York State for us. So for our listeners here, as of October 13th, there is a bill being proposed right now that would, I'm going to directly quote here from the bill. So it would be in relation to criminal history background checks for the purchase of three-dimensional printers capable of creating firearms. So it's the sale of certain three-dimensional printers. Any retailer of a three-dimensional printer sold in this state, so New York State, which is capable of printing a firearm or any components of a firearm, is required and authorized to request and receive criminal history information concerning such purchaser from the Division of Criminal Justice Services in accordance with the provisions of Section 845B and some other government level talk here. So, getting into a national criminal history record check. So to me, what that means is, I've got a local person here to me who is a grandmother who wants to buy her grandson for Christmas a 3D printer, right? Because he's a techie kid and she wants to get him something that's cool and new, right? So in order for her to like be able to teach him, she bought a 3D printer herself because she thought, this is really neat. I want to print some cool stuff, maybe print out some Christmas ornaments for them or something. So, this bill would effectively, people like her who in no way is ever going to like think of printing any part of a firearm, right? They would be subject to a criminal history background check, which, is only going to delay that actual sale of the printer And then, some people might look at that and say, well, maybe this isn't even worth the hassle of a $300 or $150 printer, that I don't even know if and when this is going to be approved. I think it's just going to bog down the entire system as well. So with that, introduction to that, what are some of your thoughts initially?
Yeah, I think initially, twofold. I'm not a person that personally cares if I get background checked for something, but I understand people that do. But like when you're looking at the impact that 3D printing has on the world, right? And just kind of the chain effect that goes with this. You buy, Granny isn't out here trying to build AKs for her grandson, right? She wants to buy it to promote STEM education and promote their personal growth, development, and interests within science, engineering, whatever, right? So
Right.
that's why they're buying it, right? So they want to tinker, it's cool, but they're gaining all these skills along the way. And by kind of putting a any type of friction in between that, um, it's just going to have such a big impact long term. Like 3D printing is so accessible to kids and giving them access and giving their brains just different opportunities to make things and create new stuff and find problems to build a product around. And um, I think that is going to have significant positive implications in the world, right? It's going to develop more kids to do more great things in the world for people. And by putting any type of friction between that, accessibility is definitely a decreaser. Um, and to me, after reading the bill, it's pretty vague. I mean, it's extremely vague right now, right? It's very, very general. Us being in the industry, we know that there's tons of different types of 3D printers. Um, there has to be a line somewhere. Like, you were talking about a little bit the process, right? We should be maybe looking at the process of it, how people are getting these files or making these files, or how do we track that? Or, there needs to be a line between the types of printers because you're right, you can't like Amazon sells printers, right? How is Amazon
Exactly.
going to then allow to get a background check so 13-year-old Michael can go get a little Ender to play
Right.
around with?
Right. Yeah.
Um, so
It's
there's
like, what is capable? What does capable mean? Right. So
any 3D printer is capable, right?
exactly. Right. It says, capable of printing a firearm. First of all, I don't know that anything is capable of printing an entire firearm, right? The
Yeah.
firing components and all of that. Even a company that I know of, in the MJF, powder bed fusion, that actually has a license to print firearms. That's a whole nother story. But they still have to have other components added to it for this thing to even fire, right? So,
Right. Yeah.
to me again, like I'm kind of in agreement with you that like it's not so much about the getting a criminal history background check for me. That's in itself, I think that's just going to be a detriment to the entire process. But especially for schools as well. I mean, it's like it's just going to, look at the wrong problem, right? Because it
Mhm.
isn't even the actual problem, it's just the end result of what happens. But these people who are, sharing around files for, lowers that they've printed for handguns, and the ease of accessibility online of buying an assembly for the rest of the gun, I think that's the much bigger problem to worry about, for people who are thinking about trying to prohibit the sale of a 3D printer to 13-year-old Johnny over here. Like,
Mhm.
it's, yeah. I mean, what is a company like Amazon, or what is a educational institution going to do if they purchase a printer? Do you have to have every student that wants to use that printer background checked then? Or do you only have one person who is capable of printing at the educational institution? Like, for me, it's just so far uh, out in left field about like what the actual problem is, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that just it's definition of how government works, right? It's and you can see it since with the whole Facebook scandal, right? Like
Yeah,
watching Mark Zuckerberg do these court trials when he's just talking, software to them and they have zero clue on how the internet even works and how ads
right.
work. And like It's people with very zero to no experience just see, oh, people are 3D printing guns, let's ban 3D printers.
Yeah.
Um, and then that's just like the quick thing to jump through. But I think what needs to happen is, one, luckily it's just proposed. This bill won't pass as it is. Just as it is, I'm so certain just that won't pass as it is. It might go through some revisions, and that's an opportunity for people like us and other additive manufacturing professionals in the industry to meet with our local government and talk to them and give them some clarification, really try to work with
Right.
them on understanding the bill, and then some of the nuances, and see how, if it's serious, how we can revise it in a way that's going to work for everybody, actually allow them to achieve the goal, but allow 3D printing to continue inspiring future inventors and innovators in the world.
Right. Right.
So it's going to be some work. Luckily, nothing gets passed tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we'll see. But geez, yeah, what a shock to hear this morning. Like, okay, well, that's going to be
Yeah.
another fun little hiccup to jump through.
Well, it's just, as of 13 days ago, so still super new. I actually mentioned it to an assemblyman, here locally in the capital region yesterday in person, and he didn't even know about the bill. So
Mm,
I'm sure there's, again, probably hundreds of bills that are in session right now being proposed, but it's just interesting to me, again, not being involved in any type of political sense, really. Like, how does this even get to the bill stage before someone, like, wouldn't those people go to people like you and me, hopefully you
yeah,
think, and say, hey, do you think this is a good idea or not? Like, was there any kind of advice given into thinking of proposing something like this? Because I'm glad that it's gotten so much press already. There's been a couple of articles written on it. And that's the way I found out about it just a few days ago. Was I saw, I think probably some post on LinkedIn about it, and then that led me to an article, then a couple other articles about it. So yeah, definitely just, I mean, trying to raise this educational bar about what FDM 3D printing is, or any type of 3D printing, to educate people about what can and should be 3D printed, right?
hmm
Not to mention like the huge safety aspects with, trying to print any part of a firearm. Um,
yeah, right, yeah.
so, I mean, just had to go on that little bit of a rant there, because it's something that, being here in New York State, is, if anything close to that would be passed, it would directly affect, our
Country.
business, and trying to help, those people in, government, to see, how we view this type of bill, and what our suggestions might be for trying to help combat some of the, poor things that are actually being done with this process. So uh,
Yeah, and that's exactly what needs to happen. The upside of 3D printing is too high to limit it in any way, for silly, stupid people trying to make silly things that hurt people with.
right.
So yeah. We
Uh,
got it. Yeah, figure out what that line is, and 100%.
yeah. So it's going to be something of something of conversation here, I'm sure, over the next 30 days, and we'll see if we can get in front of any of our other local state representatives to try to educate them. So hope,
100%.
hope our listeners here do get educated about this. If you're in New York State, um, this bill is uh, A8132. If you're in New York State and you're in the 3D printing industry, please look at it. Please talk to your local representatives about your viewpoints on this, whether you agree with John and I or not. I just think it's something that definitely needs to be talked about and understood a little bit more from all viewpoints. But yeah, I mean, getting back to a little bit more, lighthearted conversation here with like consumer level printing, right? Um,
hmm
you and I talked about at the Innovation Summit, how do we keep all of our printers busy all the time, right? I'm super excited to try to come up with some of these more consumer level products. And, I'm sure you have a million ideas a day like we do about like, oh, this would be cool, that would be cool. Can you share any of your personal ideas or your team's ideas about, what could be a cool 3D printed consumer level product?
All day we think about 3D printed consumer level products.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know, when you have the power to make something yourself, it's like any opportunity to do something like that. Remember when the chicken nugget like dipping sauce like vent thing was popular? Do you remember that? That was a couple
No,
years
I'm
ago.
gonna have to look this up and pull up a picture
Dude,
of it here later.
huge 3D printed consumer good products. So I think of things like that all the time. It was cool. So it was pretty much just like a tray that you clip into your vent in your
Yeah.
car, and you can put your dipping
Oh,
sauce in it.
that's
So
great.
if you
That's
just,
awesome.
yeah, like stuff like that I think about all the time. We do this promotional product, this little fidget spinner tchotchke.
Nice.
I always think about ways that that could be marketed to gear towards different consumers and sold. A lot of like brain games, 3D printing is so good for these movable, functional, like puzzle type of things,
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many on Thingiverse. So if somebody came up with their own one of those, that could get some really good traffic.
Sure.
Um, there's consumer goods is where the fun of 3D printing is. I love selling B2B because that's what pays the bills, but like
Hmm.
jigs and fixtures and things versus nugget dipping sauce cups, like yeah, that just sounds way more exciting to me. So
Right.
yeah, always kind of thinking of products. Not going to disclose any because who knows, maybe one day we do end up taking one to market, who knows,
Sure.
but
Fair enough.
um it's just the power of it.
Yeah.
It's a really funny one that I get pretty frequently is a lot of food items. Custom cookie cutters,
Yeah.
burrito trays and like nacho trays that are different shaped cups and things for
Okay.
your salsas.
Nice.
A lot of food items, which is
Yeah.
interesting because you actually, FDM's never going to get certified by the FDA because of the complications and like the layer lines, and they don't like how the bacteria can stay in little layer lines, and it's like you really got to scrub it out. So,
Sure.
food and 3D printing isn't, it's fine, but know that you have to clean these suckers really well.
Sure.
We actually use a copper filled material for this. It's an antimicrobial material
Okay.
for any type of these food items because at least it'll kill bacteria that's on the any viruses that's on the part.
Sure. Have you guys used
Yeah.
any polypropylene with printing anything for food? Because that can be, sterilized
Have
and
not.
put in the dishwasher. So I feel comfortable with that, whether or not we do
Yeah,
through the FDA to print out a set of lightweight
right. Definitely
backpacking
not.
camping gear. Um,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I like to backpack and camp. And earlier this year I was out camping for a couple nights with my wife, and I turn over my cup, one of those that can like just squeeze into this little tiny pot, right? You got like a set of two of everything in there, right?
Hmm.
I turn it over and I look at it and it's got the PP, recycle symbol on it. And I'm like, oh, well,
Yeah.
polypropylene, there you go. Why aren't
Right.
we creating more consumer level products with polypropylene, 3D printing them, and then recycling it as well, because polypro can be recycled. So
Right. And polypropylene's a beautiful material. I
yeah.
love how it looks, how it feels.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's 100% right. Yeah, I guess I never thought about using it for food safe products, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if
that's
it's
awesome.
already being used, for that kind of,
Yeah.
I don't see why not. So we are the North American distributor of PP Print, their polypropylene material coming out of Germany, and that's what they solely focus on as a filament company is polypropylene. So I think that's pretty unique in that they can like be hyper focused on getting it really, really right.
Hmm.
So I've been super
Love that.
impressed with their Polypro, very easy to print. And albeit, there's definitely some warping issues of polypropylene in general, because the material shrinks as it cools, and that
Hmm.
never going to get around that unless you blend it with something else. But pure polypro, having that little bit of warping, we've been able to mitigate that warping a little bit by using build tax sheets and then build tax polypro bond adhesive. That's worked extremely well. PP Print also does have their own rubber surface that I have to imagine has polypropylene,
Yeah,
chemical
built in it.
nature. It definitely works. There's now a permanently bonded plate solution, which works a lot better than
Hmm.
just the sheet itself with a double-sided adhesive. It definitely sticks to it super well and mitigates practically any warping. So for being able to reproduce parts on the same build plate without having to add any adhesives or clean it off, really nice solution, but still does need to be cleaned after 10 or so prints. And if any dust accumulates, then it won't actually stick very well. They have their own cleaner for it, although it's extremely caustic. So I've been working with them to try to dull that down just a little bit.
Mm.
But yeah, polypro, man, I'm definitely a huge fan of polypro.
Yeah,
We make a lot of our prosthetic sockets out of polypropylene. And PP Print just came out with their carbon fiber polypro.
which
Uh,
you gave me a kilogram of at the conference. I much appreciate that. That's sitting there waiting for a printer to get freed up to print something good with. Uh,
nice.
what should I print? What should be the first good test print with it?
Well, so all of their PP Print products just got skin certification. So all of including the carbon fiber, are certified for skin safe applications. So again, whether something is coming into contact with the human body externally, or if you're looking to do something consumer based for that needs a little bit of flexibility, but the carbon fiber still adds that stiffness to it. And I've seen it's just a super nice black matte surface finish.
Mm,
So structurally, I
mm,
think it's there, and it hides layer lines incredibly well. So yeah, I would definitely put it
love
to the
that.
test if you need something maybe just a little bit stiffer, but might still have some flexibility to it, for the carbon fiber polypro specifically.
Sick.
Yeah.
I have some needs. I have some needs within the shop right now. We just moved to the new location, so we got the walls getting painted. They're tearing out pipes and stuff. But yeah, I could use some really strong like brackets and things just to keep stuff up out of the way. And
Sure.
um, that's the best part, right? Never have to go to Home Depot again.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, well, and that's the beauty of it too, right? So I've got some pretty big printers. Film Innovations, can't say enough good things about that. Soon to have one of their larger machines, the Icarus. So that'll definitely put us into that like very high flow, large volume printing. Um,
Hmm.
so that'll be exciting coming up here soon. But the other day I needed a couple garbage cans for the office, so I printed them in the Film Innovations Kratos here out of black PLA in a matter of 2 hours in vase mode, and it's the perfect perfect little trash can.
That's awesome.
And again, like those little things that you need around the office. I needed a couple door hangers for like my coat and other things. So, print stuff instead of, immediately thinking about going to the hardware store.
Uh-huh.
We've come up with this 3D printed floating shelf as well,
Hmm.
that in two pieces, printed on both of these printers, one part printed on each. They both print in under 6 hours. I think it's might be under like 5.5 even. Printed out of PLA again, but it's this floating shelf that has this wall mount bracket that you screw into at least one stud, and three separate screw sections, and then can just slide right on. So
Oh, cool.
pretty sleek. And yeah, thinking about those different consumer level products, I think is where more of these conceptions about what can be printed and in high volume is definitely going to change here over the next, couple years. But yeah, I mean, for what you and I are doing, I think what you're doing over there at Innosek is awesome, and trying
Cool. Same to
to,
you.
yeah, man, need more collaboration like this. That's definitely where I think the 3D printing industry in general is going to help, flourish as an industry, is working together more in terms of education, getting consumers educated, getting people who want to prototype, getting them educated about what can and how we should print things and design things to be printed with different printing processes. But yeah, just super thankful for your input today, and in general for what's going on out in Buffalo. If I kind of travel back out that way here soon, definitely want to check out what you guys got going on.
Absolutely.
You know,
Anytime.
yeah, man. Yeah, anything else that you want, the listeners here to know about Innosek, or to think about
Ooh.
for 3D printing consumer products?
Yeah, man, that's my biggest thing is just like keep thinking big, right? Keep challenging the status quo. Keep thinking, keep finding problems that you can create on, and use 3D printing as the engagement piece for yourself, for your family, your whoever it is. Just dabbling and having the ability to create anything really changes the trajectory of life.
Mhm.
Um, so buy a 3D printer. Hopefully you can do it before you need to get background checked.
Yeah,
And you can add me on LinkedIn, innosec.com, John Kappel on LinkedIn. Check out the In the Game pod on YouTube. On any Meta product, I'm John.Kappel, Kappel. So connect with me there.
for sure, man. We'll put some of those links there in the show notes here as well.
Sick.
Thanks again for taking the time. I appreciate it, and
Thank
looking
you.
forward to some stuff that we can work on together, man.
Let's do it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening again. Happy printing, and thanks for listening to the Fabrication Friday podcast. It was a really interesting podcast there with John from Innosek. Honestly, we covered a lot, from consumer products that could be 3D printed and into your home very shortly here. There are definitely quite a few products that we're already looking at commercializing, with some of the fun stuff that we come up with from day to day that you heard John and I talk about a little bit. John has a wealth of knowledge for design for additive manufacturing. If you're looking for that type of service for his fleet of 50 printers, FDM based, definitely reach out to John, reach out to him, and I'm going to start doing a little bit of work together. So it should be interesting how we can collaborate on that. Sounds like he's got a pretty solid team. So definitely looking forward to working with him. The comments we had, and the conversation that I spurred about 3D printed firearms is something, honestly, that I'm kind of passionate about, just because I think that not that I'm a gun enthusiast by any means. However, I know that people should have their right to bear arms, and there's definitely the right way to go about that and the wrong way to go about that. So for the people who are, just grabbing files off the internet, grabbing these other assemblies for the uppers, that are the actual components that make up the firing aspects of the gun, I think we really need to educate our local government in New York State here, and the rest of the country, to what should actually be targeted when we're talking about 3D printing firearms, and all of a sudden slapping on a bill that says, oh, well, we'll just target the 3D printers in general, and that's going to be good enough. It's not good enough, really. And it's actually going to hinder a lot of other things for a lot of other people that are using 3D printers for wonderful applications, namely being the educational space, for stirring, STEM education within schools and other institutions. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to follow up with me. Email joe@ascentfab.com, or give us a call here at AscentFab, and we'd be happy to chat with you about some of our viewpoints on that, and exactly how we could potentially stop that file sharing from going on, as well as the sale of the the upper parts, that's really what should be, background checked and a little bit more regulated, in my opinion. But yeah, so getting back into, the Fabrication Friday approach, thank you very much again for listening to this week's episode. And hopefully we'll see you next week with the Victoria Hand Project coming on. So that'll be a fun one as well. Thank you very much again, guys, and happy printing.